So this time around, the theme is around setting a quarterly theme and celebrating success. So that's what we're looking at this time around. It comes from the sort of the rhythm habits area of the business. Really, it's part of that rhythm we want to build in every 90 days. We want to be thinking about what is the key theme. So what's the big idea? So the big idea here is that what we're trying to think about is what's the one thing, what's the critical number, the one thing we want everybody to focus on for that quarter. How can we make that a bit more fun and a bit more engaging for the whole team? So it's not just a dry, we've got to achieve this amount of sales or something like that. How can we make it fun and build it into something that we can engage the whole team with, not just maybe the one or two individuals that can directly impact on that number, if that's the case? And then how are we going to think about celebrating when that goal is achieved? Ideally when we've achieved that goal, but we'll hear in a minute, it doesn't necessarily have to be about entirely achieving the goal. And how are we going to recognize contributions from people as well when we've done it? So that idea of making sure that we are celebrating and recognizing success. And why is that whole recognition celebration thing important? Well, there's all sorts of surveys around, of course, but a large number of people, 79%, apparently leave businesses due to feeling underappreciated, whether that's directly from their manager or from the business. So it can be incredibly demotivating from that point of view. And a whopping 2/3 pretty much claim that they've had no recognition within the last 12 months. So we're not very good as business owners quite often about giving that recognition, depending on our personality types as well. And I know a lot of business owners are those if we're looking back at the DISC profile, they're those high Ds, the hawk kind of people, the peregrine falcon kind of people, and not necessarily great, find it easy to give people a pat on the back in a genuine way and recognize success. But we need to be thinking about that. And a third state that underappreciation impacts on their productivity, and apparently 78% would work harder if given more appreciation. So that's the why, perhaps, as to why we need to think about celebrating success. And how can setting a quarterly theme help within that aspect of celebrating success, but also how can it help in other days? And what we're thinking here is we've got so many things as a business owner that could be called priorities. There's so many things that are on our plate, and the idea of setting a quarterly theme can actually help to distill through to some of those key things that are really important. And we often find ourselves as business owners struggling to narrow down to what we recommend as being those somewhere between 3 to 7 priorities for the quarter for the business. And it's that whole thing of the coulda, woulda, shoulda sort of stuff often. And remember, what we're trying to do through the 90-day planning process is to go from all of those things we could do, narrow them down a bit more to the things that we should do, and then right down to those things that we must do. So we avoid this coulda, woulda, shoulda sort of thing. So getting down to things that we must do, and getting down to that one thing can sometimes help. It's sometimes easier to think of the one thing that we really need to achieve than it is to say, what are our 3 to 7 things that we need? And this has come from learning from working with a few clients. And there's one in particular that I'm thinking of where they acquired another company, which essentially meant they got another couple of senior people within their team. And when it came down to identifying the priorities, it was hard to get them down to less than 10, let alone less than 7. And that, they were literally having a great big long list of things that they needed to do. So what the business did in the end was just say, right, what is it that we really must achieve? If we did one thing this quarter, what is it, and what's the number that went with that? And then they turn that into a theme and put a little bit of a rallying cry around that, essentially. And that helped them then to actually come back to that focus, because we all know the focus is really important. And if we're trying to do too many things, we probably don't get any of them done properly. So think about the one thing and building into a theme can really help with that. So what do we mean by that? Well, let's look at a couple of examples. Very blurry picture here of a company called the City Bin. And they're great at these quarterly themes. And one of the themes that they came up with for 1 month was they realized, a bit ironically for a waste company, but they realized there was a lot of waste going on in their business. It's right up Granger's alley here with lean thinking and reducing waste, and also Louise as well is very keen on this side of things. So City Bin realized there was a lot of wasted time going on and a lot of wasted expense going on in the business. And instead of coming up with one or two, the leadership team coming up with one or two big ideas, they thought, why don't we throw this out to the whole of the business, even the people that are out wheeling the bins and putting the rubbish back in the back of a truck. And they challenged everybody to, every single week, every employee to come up with one idea that would save either 15 minutes of time or 15 euros. It's actually an Irish company. So, or 15 euros in money. So 15 minutes or 15 euros. They challenged everybody every week to come up with that, and they labeled it Bin It. That was the theme that they had, and every week they reinforced it. They looked for those ideas. They did some fun activities around coming up with those ideas and sharing some of the ideas, and looking for then ways that they could essentially reduce waste, as in time and money, during that quarter. And over the 13 weeks of that quarter, they came up with a total of 845 ideas. How they prioritized those, I don't know at the end of the day, but they came up with 845 great ideas, and it was much better than just having, say, a suggestion box or something like that, which a lot of companies would do. So that's one idea of a theme. Here's another one. They labeled it Route 66. And the idea was to reduce, what they were looking to do was to reduce the debtor days, the amount of time, the amount of days, the time that it was taking to collect the money into the business. And it was running at something like 3 months. It was over 90 days on average that it was taking for them to collect the money in. So they wanted to get that down to essentially 2 months, or 66 days is what they were aiming for. So they called it Route 66. So again, instead of just saying we want to reduce our debtor days to 66 days, they came up with a theme around it. Every week they looked at it, they came up with activities around Route 66 to celebrate it all. And at the end of the day, when they achieved it, they had a big event that again was themed around Route 66. So there's just a couple of ideas there. We did something a quarter or two ago within BizSmart around our Smart 90, around our 90-day planning product and software, and we labeled that Joe 90 from you remember the sort of similar to Thunderbirds sort of idea. So we just did a couple of things around that. We weren't as creative as perhaps City Bins were, or the company with Route 66, but we did a couple of little things about that. But it helped to get people a little bit more interested in that theme. And couple of nuances around this. I mentioned at the beginning, you don't necessarily, with that, if you're setting the one thing and ideally you've got a critical number, what's the critical number that we need to achieve? So we think of that Route 66, the critical number they defined was 66 days. It doesn't have to be a case of being completely black or white, whether you achieve it or not. And Louise is a big proponent of this in particular, where we set ourselves, and you'll see this in the Smart 90 software, those of you that do our 90-day planning, we set a poor, a good, and an ideal, or poor, okay, an ideal, or you might have a red, amber and green approach to it. But so that the idea is that you've got bands. So it's not just a simple case of 66 or nothing, but it could be ideal if we got 66 or more, but actually good might be anywhere, 66 or less, actually, in that case. Good might be anywhere between 66 and 75, for example, and poor might be worse than 75. So you can set bands. And if you really wanted to, you could even change the way you would celebrate based on where you achieved. A little thing that I thought was quite interesting here as well is it's not always just about celebrating success. Sometimes you can look at celebrating failure, and have that attitude that actually, if we've not achieved something, what have we learned from it? That's this idea of that is failure is success in progress. So we may not have actually got to where we thought we'd get to, but what have we learned along the way that might take us even somewhere different, maybe even somewhere better? And I'm thinking here of a particular example with a software company. And it was their standard idea that they would be developing a number of different games. It was as a gaming software company. They'd have a number of different projects on the go during a quarter, and they would cull one every quarter. They would stop one. And the idea being that they would prioritize on the ones that really were actually living up to expectations, because they didn't all. But what they would do is they would have a celebration event around the one that they killed or stopped, with the idea of what have we learnt from the reasons that this one isn't actually going forwards and isn't living quite up to the expectations that we had. So just something maybe to think about from that aspect. And then also something that Luke was really keen to remind us of when we talked about this as a team a couple of weeks ago. We don't all have big teams. But even if we do, we've all got families. But certainly if we're running a business and it's largely ourselves running that business, it's our families are having to put up with the ups and downs of how things are going. They're hearing about it all the time. They're the ones that perhaps are not seeing us if we're late back, because things are pulling us to one side. So maybe something to think about in celebrating your success every quarter is how can I involve the family in that? Can we, if we achieve what it is that we want to achieve, is that when we go out for a quarterly slap up meal, or is there something else that we can do to involve the family, not forgetting therefore that we all rely on our families, and we want to make sure that we keep that family life working really well. So that is all I wanted to say, I think, around the idea of quarterly themes and celebrating success. Granger, anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, I suppose one of the, we've had this discussion previously with some of the people working with, and you can celebrate in small ways, not just big ways. So we don't have to give people holidays or huge activities, going go-karting or anything like that. It can also just be small celebrations around the office. It could be when I was working in the corporate world, though people don't like donuts these days in the same way, but we used to celebrate with a donut day if we hit our numbers in terms of what we did. Spending a couple of hours together, just talking, sitting together, eating donuts and talking about things. Yeah, maybe Pete, I originally looked a bit more like you then, but so there are other ways when we're talking about celebration. It's not necessarily spending huge amounts of money. It's actually as a team celebrating, rewarding, taking that time off to stop and then celebrate and talk through.
Very good. Louise, anything you'd add?
Well, Kevin, you've already mentioned it 2 or 3 times. This is a big thing for me, making sure that we are listening to, engaging with our employees, and making sure that we are celebrating. And as Granger said, it doesn't have to be the big things, the little things that really count. And excuse me. I come from a manufacturing background. If I wanted to know the answer to a question, I popped down onto the factory floor and had a chat with the guys who were running the machines. They could always give me some great ideas, and we would always celebrate the successes when we got those. So tying them in with a monthly theme is great, because it means everybody can get behind it, and you've got that opportunity to focus on something really clearly. But just that opportunity to celebrate and to feel the value of your contribution to the business. I think we tend to forget the importance of the little things. So yeah, just those little celebrations, linking them with the quarterly theme to try and drive everybody in one direction. Yeah, brilliant.
Good. Luke, anything from you? And then we'll open up to the floor for a couple of questions and comments, I think.
Luke's gone, I'm afraid.
Oh, Luke's gone. Okay. So I think Stu,
I was just going to add, you can actually, do it in a very small business. If you're a 1 or 2 person business, don't just think we're talking about celebrating with a team. If you're setting a goal yourself and you achieve it, celebrate it yourself. Yeah, it is important to celebrate as the business owner as much as celebrating the team success in terms of doing things. So take that time and celebrate it. Yeah, it's an important aspect of it.
Good.
Just one quick other thing, which I'm sure Lizzie will be very familiar with. It's this idea of the science behind good news and bad news. We have certain chemicals that get triggered in our brains when we get bad news. And forgive me, Lizzie, I can never remember which way around it is, but we trigger a chemical in our brain when things are not going so well, and we're thank you. That stays in our system for 2-3 days. It stays in our system for a long time. When we get the good news and the happy stuff and all the nice things, we get a different chemical released in our brain. Trouble is that only lasts 2 or 3 hours. So, the idea of, and that's, as Kevin said, a lot of businesses are started by people on the D side. And we hear a lot of people saying, well, why should I congratulate people for doing their job? Well, actually, we need that not constant, because it needs to be genuine, but we do need a more regular feeling of working together and it being for a purpose, and we are making good progress. And even in the worst of months or the worst of weeks, you can find 1 or 2 small things to be really pleased about, to be really thankful for. So find those little things. They are quite important.
Good. Stu, you had your hand up a moment ago, I think. No, maybe not. Okay, you didn't. Any questions or any thoughts from the room? Ooh, none at all. Yeah, there we go. Emma, well done, Emma.
We're obviously only a small team, but for larger teams, how would you, if you want to celebrate success, but what about if you've got people that literally don't pull their weight and slack? Like, how can you include them? You've got to include them, but do you know what I mean? It could annoy some people if you're celebrating success, but there's one team player that literally drags everybody back.
Yeah, let's see. Should we throw that open to the room? Let's see what people, anybody got any thoughts on that? Before we pitch in?
I would say that you've got to get the targets realistic in the first place. If you've got a team member that are not hitting their targets, not pulling their weight, then that's down to management or their team leader sitting with them and discussing why they're not doing it. We've had situations where that exact same thing has happened, and we've excluded people from certain celebrations because they've not pulled their weight. But it's all part of the realistic target setting in the first instance, I would suggest.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Thank you, Richard. Yeah, Colin.
I think it comes down to the 5 behaviours of a team. Build a team on trust and then accountability. Your team will hold itself accountable.
Yeah.
You've got it there. If you've got someone in the team who's not pulling the weight, it's effectively toxic behaviour, and you need to remove them from your team. That's what I think. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, good. If you have built that culture of trust and accountability, then it will be the team that will help out with that. And if you're celebrating as a team, you're celebrating that success, people, the team will realize, equally the individuals will realize. And yeah, I'm not sure I'd go as far as Richard in excluding people from the celebration, but certainly, yeah, Granger.
It wasn't me.
I just add to that, really. So in terms of my opinion, and when I've run sites, as an operations leader, we used to celebrate regardless, because celebration is celebration of the numbers. There are other processes in the business that deal with people that are not performing. So use those processes separately. Don't use them to crack the same nut. Okay. So, and that's really important, because yeah, everybody has to succeed. and then they'll see they're not, and then use those other methods, you know, which Richard talking about in terms of, you know, discipline, control, measurement systems, whatever it is that you have in your business, use those to find those people underperforming and help them either achieve or leave.
Yeah. Celebrate and recognize in public, chastise in private. It's always a good rule to follow. Right. Any other thoughts? How do we, has anybody, I tell you what, has anybody got a really good example?
Lizzie's just put her hand up, Kevin, before you get into full
Sorry, go
flow.
on.
So
two things. Number one, obviously, if Sammy's not before we have that, as Granger says, you have that conversation, say what's going on, because you never know. It might be something going on at home. It might be all sorts of reasons why that case is. The other thing about celebration, I don't know if many of you have heard of love languages, but love languages is we all have a different way of wanting to be appreciated. So if you know the love, and it's a very free quiz you can free quiz you can do, but it actually identifies how people like to be appreciated. So some people would just want a bunch of flowers. Some people would value more a bit of time off. So everyone has their own way. So if you know your team and you know what their love language is, that's another way you can celebrate. So that something really means to them.
Nice. Like it. So that's something we can Google, is it? And do a quick...
Yes, just Google love languages, and we all have a different way of appreciation. Some people just like words, some people like gifts, some people like a hug. There's all sorts of ways. Every single one of us will have a different way, and it's great for relationships as well, you know, when you're at home too. So it's just an interesting way. I'll see if I can find the link and I'll put it in the chat.
and it's a really great point you make there, Lizzie, because no, we are all individuals, and you know, Kevin's known me long enough. I've always had a love-hate relationship with HR departments, because you know they are there to help us provide that structure so that we make sure that we treat everybody the same. But at the end of the day, everybody's an individual. So the real skill in running a team and in running a business is being able to work, particularly with a bigger team, work within that system that sets the ground rules, if you like, but be able to get the best out of each member of the team, and understanding that everybody's different. Everybody has a different trigger point, or a different, as Lizzie said, a different love language. And the real skill is in being able to work within that structure, but also provide that real individuality with people, because we are none of us the same.
Excellent. Good. Anybody got any thoughts on celebrating? Any good examples of what they do celebrating success, or even quarterly themes? If this is something that you've tried before?
I don't know that I've got anything like that, but I've just quickly noted the 5 love languages that Granger's just popped in the thing, and I think we should probably avoid number 5, which is touch.
We're all going to want to, yeah. Well, I was a little bit nervous about typing love languages into Google.
I think compliments, quality time, and gifts, acts of service, but physical touch probably not when it comes to employees.
Okay.
No, you
telling us a little bit about his past. That's good.
Just a thought. I mean, I came from a sales background, and lots of league tables, and performance was very transparent across groups, and the sort of, in any team, in any sort of discipline, you're going to get amazing people and people who are going to struggle with certain roles, might not be in the right role for them. So in terms of celebrating, you know, the top performers used to get whisked away on foreign trips and things like that, and the bottom performers didn't, but it was all very transparent and designed to incent the right behaviours and the right strategy. So I don't think there's anything wrong with excluding people in certain disciplines within a business, if that makes sense, as long as it's done transparently and you can reward the top people, and people can actually see how they can become better and then win those extra awards, be it a bit more pay or a bunch of flowers or whatever it might be, box of chocolates. So yeah, just a slightly different thought possibly.
Yeah,
might be a bit old fashioned these days though. I don't
know. In the corporate world I used to be in, we had a 10% rule, which was the top 10% got given holidays and the bottom 10% got cut.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Shelley, I noticed Shelley.
Yes,
You had
yeah.
So we have, obviously we have thousands of children on our books, and we've got about 50 members of staff now. And so we have a weekly newsletter that goes out, and I celebrate a coach of the month, and I get people to, you know, kind of go out there and tell me who's going to win. We also do club of the week as well, and gymnast and trampolinist of the week stuff. But recently, I mean, I've just had a bit of a failure with a member of staff, which was the lead coaches have to motivate their staff. So, but one of them came to me and said, oh, she's sitting down, somebody had an accident, blah, blah, blah. And I put a group chat out, a general chat, probably my fault. And I've gone, hey, just so you know, we don't sit down on the job. And, you know, because this had happened. And she's private messaged me saying, I don't think I can do this anymore. So, which I suppose is good. But at the same time, I probably should have gone through the back door.
And that's great. I mean, that's Lizzie, you made the point earlier that there's no such thing as failure, only feedback from which we can learn. And
absolutely,
that's a classic example. If we don't make mistakes, we don't learn an awful lot, do we?
Yeah, as you get bigger, you make more and more mistakes. It's just like more times to celebrate your mistakes than there are to celebrate your successes, I think. So,
Yeah,
fun.
And that's another interesting, because it sort of comes back as well to something Colin, or makes me think of something Colin was saying earlier on about the team maybe being the ones that hold each other accountable to that aspect. And I remember a podcast, and I know I've spoken to this with the team a little bit, with Sir Alex Ferguson, and he was asked how he keeps the culture going within the team when they get a prima donna come in, when he does this signing of some new fantastic footballer who's, you know, the bee's knees, and they come into the team. Sir Alex, how do you make sure that they adopt all the things that the team want to do? And he says, I don't. It's so embedded in the team that they do it for me. If he comes off and his socks are around his ankles, they will tell him to pick his socks up, not me. If he wanders off dejectedly at half time, ambles off, they will say that's not what we do. We run off full of energy at half time, and we run back on at the next half full of energy. I don't have to do that. And that might be, you know, I think that's where Colin was coming from. If that is so well done within the team, they will pick up for us essentially on that, and it's not always on our shoulders to do that bit of disciplining.
I think essentially it's also really important for us to remember that actually, if we do run this very small business and it is just us as well, it's very easy to forget to celebrate things. So when I ran a small team, we used to celebrate every week. And we used to kind of look at our successes. We kind of did a bit of review and just did a bit of celebration. That was always like the last thing we did on a Friday. And then once a term, I'd send, you know, so both lads were gamers, so I sent them a voucher. One had a PlayStation, one an Xbox, so I sent them a voucher for kind of, you know, so they could buy a game or kind of whatever it was. But actually, when they then left to kind of they then get sort of, you know, jobs because they were trainee students, actually I stopped that process of kind of looking to see what was good to celebrate that week. So it was really interesting that actually when we are running our own businesses for ourselves, and it is just us to actually remember to celebrate everything as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Well said. Good. Anybody got any final things they'd like to say on quarterly themes and celebration before we move on to the breakouts? No, I think we're done. So just remember, this is part of that whole business rhythm, that 90-day rhythm. And what we're suggesting here, as well as setting those, so we're setting our priorities for the next 90 days. What does good look like? We're then coming down to, okay, so of those priorities, probably what is the number one thing that we really must achieve? And is there a number that goes with that? That becomes our critical number. So what's the one thing that we must achieve? And now how can we wrap that up in a theme and make it fun and engaging for everybody, not just one or two people in the business, but for everybody that's involved in the business to feel that they're part of this theme for the quarter, and how we're going to celebrate when we get there. essentially is what it's about. And if you also mix in some of the things that everybody's saying around here as well about individual recognition, you could do a lot worse than making sure once a quarter you have on your agenda, if you like, who are we going to recognize, you know, this quarter? You know, who are we going to give, as Lizzie said, you know, if we know the love language, who are we simply going to give a pat on the back to, or a thank you, personalized thank you card, or something like that? But thinking about how we're going to build recognition into into our quarterly rhythm, so that it's not something that we think about now and then we forget for 6 months or 9 months and then think, oh crikey, we haven't recognized anybody.